What's up YouTube? Welcome back to the channel, and today we are going to talk about something about custom liquid cooling stuff. But before we start, just want to request you guys that if you have not already subscribed to our channel, please go ahead and subscribe to our channel. Press that bell icon so that you guys can get notified about our future upcoming videos. Let's begin. So in this video, I'm basically going to talk about the various components that you would require to have a custom liquid cool loop inside your computer, and what are the various things that you should keep in your mind while you are doing one. So without any delay, let's start talking about the various components. So guys, the first component that you would require here is basically a pump and a reservoir. Now the thing that you see here, it's actually a combo. So I have the reservoir on the top, the pump is at the bottom. So as the name would suggest, basically I'm going to fill all the liquid, all my coolant inside this, and the pump here is actually going to circulate all that liquid within the loop. So this is something which is pretty important. This is one of the components that you would definitely require if you want to have a custom liquid cooled PC. Now a lot of people would argue what kind of pump is good. Like there are two kinds of pump, D5 and DDC. I have been using both of these in my different computers, or I have installed it on different computers. I really didn't find any difference in terms of their performance, but yes, in some cases DDC pumps tend to get hotter pretty early, or after kind of use for about 2 or 3 hours they tend to get a little bit warm, but nothing that you should be really worried of. So performance wise, both of them are fine. Buy the one which fits in your budget. Now the thing that you see here is basically a pump and a reservoir. Now there's something called a distribution plate. Distribution plate is a little bit complicated in terms of actually installing, although I have been using distribution plate in almost 30% or 40% of the builds that I've done. It works out absolutely fine. It gives your computer a different look, so it's completely your own choice whether you want to go with a distribution plate or something like this. This is easy to get, this is easy to install. So in my opinion, if you are a beginner, you can actually go with something like this. That's the pump and the reservoir combos. The next component that you would want to go and buy to have custom liquid cool loop inside your computer is basically the pipe. Now there are two kinds of pipes or tubings that you can actually go and buy. This one is the soft line tubing, which is pretty easy. As you can see, this is pretty flexible. It's easy to cut. You just need to go and connect this end or one end of the pipe to a radiator and the other end to the component, or maybe connect two components. So this is the cheapest. This is something which is very easy to maintain in case your system has some problems. This is very easy to remove. It's not going to take a lot of time. So I mean, if you're a beginner, go ahead with this. And basically there's nothing much. There's just a piece of tube here. It's pretty flexible, so you don't have to worry about bending this or something. So this is the one, this is the first kind of tubing that you can actually have. This is called the soft line tubing. The other kind of tubing which you see here is basically the hardline tubing. Now hardline tubing, there are three kinds of hardline tubing primarily. One is the PETG that you see here, then second one is made out of acrylic, and the third one is basically your metal tubing. Now what are the things that you would like to keep in your mind while buying something like this, a hardline tubing? Now every single pipe, it has got two diameters. One is the inner diameter and one is the external diameter. Now when you buy a pipe, you will have to be absolutely sure about your external diameter, because based on your external diameter you are going to go and buy your compression fittings, or basically the fitting to which or inside which this whole pipe is going to go and fit. The next thing that you want to keep in your mind is basically the length of the pipe itself. Now the pipe that you see here is about 1/2 meter or about 500 millimeter. Now most of the brands, they usually have 500 millimeter and 1000 millimeter pipes in length. Now if I have to go and buy a 500 millimeter tube, I probably would buy more of these, because if suppose I'm bending the pipe and I damage the pipe, or I don't get my bends properly, probably I might be, I might not be able to use this pipe. So I'll have to go and do that run all over together. Now if I do that, there's a chance that I might not be able to finish my build just because I don't have enough pipes. In any way, these are not really expensive stuff, so having more with you again is not going to kind of hurt your pocket very badly. So basically, when you go and buy a pipe, there are three things that you'll have to keep in your mind. Number one is basically what kind of material do you want to use. Basically, is it going to be a hardline tubing or a softline tubing? The second thing would be, if you go for a hardline tubing, what kind of material do you want to use for your pipes, whether it's going to be PETG, whether it's going to be a metal tube, or it's going to be acrylic. In my opinion, PETG is the easiest to work with, so I usually use PETG tubes. The third thing is basically the thickness of your pipe, your outer diameter, and based on this, I'm going to go and buy my various other compression fittings to which this pipe is going to be attached. And again, the final is basically the length of the pipe. I usually want to have probably 2 or 3 pipes more than I would probably need, so that you know, I mean, I'm not in shortage of pipe just in case if I end up damaging 1 or 2 of them. So the next component that I would want to go and buy for my custom liquid cool loop is basically the water block. Now there are 2 water blocks that can be installed inside your computer. One is for the GPU or the graphic card, which is called the GPU water block, and the one for your CPU, which is called the CPU water block. Now the water block that you see here is basically for LGA 1151 socket or for the Intel socket. Now when you're going and buying your water blocks for any component, say for a GPU or a CPU, you'll have to keep in mind a few things. Now, if you are going and buying a CPU water block, the first thing that you'll have to keep in mind, or you'll have to check, is basically what is the material of the water block itself. What I mean by this is, what is the material of the base plate that you see here. Now, if you see here, this metal part is nickel plated, but inside this, it's basically a copper water block. So that is something which is pretty important when you go and buy a block, because based on what material is your water block made out of, you're gonna buy your compression fittings and your radiator made out of the same material. Because inside a loop, you do not want to mix different materials, which can lead to corrosion, and corrosion is really bad for your computer. So guys, keep this thing in your mind, that whenever you go and buy any water block, you have to make sure that that water block is made out of just one component like copper, and based on that, you're going to go and buy your radiator and your fitting. So knowing what kind of material is the water block made out of is really very important. Now the second thing that you would want to take a note of here is basically whether the water block actually fits the socket of your CPU or not. Now AMD has AM4 socket for its mainstream desktop platforms, and Intel has LGA 1151 and LGA 1200, which came recently on the Z490 or the 10th generation Intel CPUs. Now fortunately, the LGA 1151 blocks or something like this is actually going to go and support LGA 1200 socket. So there's nothing I mean, like, to worry if you already have a water block and you plan to install it onto your LGA 1200 socket. So this is something you'll have to take care of. Don't buy a water block which is not interchangeable. So this water block, because it's for the Intel socket, I actually cannot go and install it on top of my AMD CPU. There are water blocks which have the brackets for it, which you can interchange depending upon the kind of socket you're installing that CPU water block onto. So keep in mind that the water block itself can be mounted on top of your CPU, or it can be tied, or it can be screwed down onto the socket which your motherboard has. Now when we talk of GPU water blocks, there are mainly 2 things that you'll have to take care of. The first thing, again, as I had mentioned, if your CPU water block is made out of copper, you would want to make sure that your GPU water block is also made out of copper. The second thing basically here that you want to take care of is whether or not the water block that you're trying to buy or you're buying can be installed onto top of your graphic card. Now, just to give you a small perspective, The graphic card that I have here on the system, on my system behind me, is basically a RTX 2080 Ti Founders Edition card. Now, I also have an ASUS RTX 2080 Ti, the Strix Edition. Now, the point is that the water block that's installed here cannot be installed onto my ASUS graphic card, and that is because both of these cards have different PCB layouts, and they are completely different. So when you're going and buying a graphic card or a water block for your graphic card, you'll have to make sure that that water block actually supports the make, the model number, and the manufacturer completely. If it does not, your water block is not going to be installed onto the top of your PCB. So make sure that you check with the seller, you check with the reseller, or you check with the website whether or not that graphic card can support the water block you are trying to buy. Now, the next component that I want to talk about here is basically the radiator. Now, radiator is one of, again, the most important components inside your custom liquid cool loop, and that is because this is the component that is going to displace all that heat which is being carried by the water, distilled water, or any other coolant that you're using inside your loop into the outer atmosphere or to the air. So this is something which is pretty important, and as I just mentioned, make sure the material of the radiator actually matches or exactly matches the material that your water blocks or your other components like your fittings, etc., are made out of. So be very sure about the material. Do not mix metals. Again, I'm telling you guys, you can have these radiators which are made out of aluminum. If you mix metals, you're gonna have corrosion inside your system, and you really don't want to have that inside your computer. So make sure that your radiator again is made out of same material that your CPU blocks or your fittings are made out of. Now, when you go and buy your radiator, another thing that you'll have to keep in your mind is basically the compatibility of the radiator or the size of the radiator that can be installed inside your case. Now, before you go and buy your radiator, check with your computer case manual or check with the manufacturer's website what is the maximum size of the radiator that your computer case can actually accommodate. Now, the radiator that you see here is basically a 360 millimeter radiator. Now, the size of the radiator is basically determined by the number of fans that you can actually install onto the radiator itself. So basically in the market there are two main sizes of fans which you can go and buy. One is the 120 millimeter fan and the other one is the 140 millimeter fan. So if I have a radiator which can only fit one fan, that means it's a 120 mm radiator, multiplied by 2, 240, and then multiply by 3, that's 360. Now, the most commonly used radiator size in a custom liquid cool loop is basically a 360 millimeter rad. Now, besides the length of the radiator, which we just spoke about, that is the 360 millimeter, another thing is basically the thickness of the radiator itself. Now, a radiator thickness again is important because thicker the radiator, the better, the more heat it can displace. Now, not necessarily your system would be able to support thicker radiators, but in 99% of the cases, the most commonly used sizes of radiator, the thickness of the radiator is basically 27 millimeter or 30 millimeter or 33 millimeter. I'm talking about the thickness. So that's the most commonly used. I've been using 30 millimeter radiator. This is an alpha cool radiator. So again, depending upon your manufacturer, the radiator thickness would again it could be different. Some manufacturers don't have 30 mil rads, they usually have 27 or 28 mil rads, so that's absolutely fine. That is completely dependent upon the kind of manufacturer you choose. So in my opinion, 27, 28, 30, all of them work more or less the same. Probably you might just have 1 degree difference between the two sizes, which actually doesn't make much of a difference. I mean, I would like to say it doesn't make any difference. So basically, when you go and buy a radiator, just make sure that the length of the radiator and the thickness of the radiator is perfectly fine, and you can actually install it inside your computer. Now, the last component that you would need in order to get your custom liquid cool loop done is basically the fittings. Now the fittings that you see here, there's so many fittings, and I'm just gonna go quickly and tell you guys what fitting does what. So the first one that we have is basically a compression fitting. Now this is the fitting that all of you should be having. You will have to have. Without this you cannot actually complete your loop. And the easiest way to know the number of fittings that you would require is basically your pump is going to have 2 of them. If you are going to water cool your GPU, then it's gonna have 2 of them, one for in, one for out. That makes it 4. For CPU, again, you're gonna have 2 of them. That makes it 6. And if you have a radiator, and for your radiator, not if you have a radiator, you're supposed to have a radiator. For your radiator, depending upon the number of radiators that you install, 1 or 2, every radiator would have 2, so basically 8 to 10. So basically you'll have to have about 8 to 10 compression fittings like this. And yeah, so this is basically something which is pretty important. This is something where your pipe actually is going to go and fit inside. So remember, I told you guys the thickness of the pipe, the outer diameter. So as you can see here, this has this chamber. The compression fitting has a chamber. Now when you go and insert your pipe, say for example, if I have a 16 mm pipe which has its OD, I mean, like when I say any size, it's basically the outer diameter. So if I have an outer diameter, say 16 millimeter, and my fitting is 14 millimeter, the pipe is not going to go inside. Now if this is a 16 millimeter compression fitting and I try and put inside this a 14 millimeter compression fitting, well, the pipe is going to go, but it's not going to be tight. It's going to be very loose, and then you are going to get leaks. So make sure the size of your compression fitting match exactly the size of your pipes. That is extremely important. So compression fitting is something that you would need to have depending upon the number of components that you have or inside your system which you are going to go and liquid cool. Multiply it by 2, and that is the number of compression fittings that you would require. The next component here is basically a 90-degree fitting but with a compression. So this is basically something wherein, for example, your graphic card is vertically mounted and you want to connect a pipe to it so that the water can flow inside it. So if your compression fitting is straight, say for example here, then your pipe will have to come and do a 90-degree bend here. Whereas in this case, what happens is, because this already has a bend which is a 90-degree bend, the pipe can just come straight and fit inside this compression fitting. Now again, this is a compression fitting of 90-degree. This is a male to a female 90-degree compression fitting. I'm going to write the names of these compression fittings in the description down below so that you guys can go and check that out. So this is something which you'll have to keep in your mind, how many 90-degree fittings you would require. Usually I use these kind of fittings for my radiators and for my graphic card. So basically I usually have about 4 to 6 of them with me, and I would go and decrease the number of my compression fittings, the normal compression fittings here, by about 4 of them. So in my case, I probably would end up using 4 to 6 of these. The next fitting here is basically again a 90-degree fitting, but this, although this has a compression fitting, but this is female to female adapter. Now this is something that you would want if you don't want to bend your pipes at a certain place. Now if you want to have a 90-degree bend and you're not confident about bending your pipe by yourself, you can actually straight cut the pipes, open these compression fittings here, insert the pipe, close this. Again, the other side you do the same thing, put the pipe, close this, and then you have a 90-degree bend which is pretty straight. So depending upon the number of bends that you want to have, you would want to go and buy these. Usually in a loop you won't have more than 6 bends. I've never had more than 6 bends inside my loop, or maximum 8 of them. You don't want to buy a lot of these. The next fitting here is basically a male to female 90°, but this is the one which does not have a compression fitting. So in case you are not able to buy something like this, you would want to go and buy a 90° fitting like this, and then towards the front side of this you can go and attach your compression fitting. So you have a 90° fitting like this that can be connected or attached to a GPU block or to a CPU block or to a radiator, whatever you may call it. The next fitting I want to talk about here is basically again a fitting which is a 45° angle. Now depending upon the kind of loop that you would have, probably you might not want to have a 90° bend, instead you would want to have a 45° bend. So this is something that can come into use. I would not recommend you guys just going for this when you are having your loop for the first time. It's a little bit complicated. Try and have straight runs, try and have a 90° run, which is pretty simple, which shouldn't be very difficult for you guys to do. So make sure that you, don't complicate your first loop. You're going to get confused in terms of what components or what kind of fitting should you be buying. So this is a 45° kind of fitting. Depending upon whether or not you want to go for a certain angle, you would want to use this. So the next fitting that I want to talk about here is basically these extenders here. Now these extenders really come handy, especially when you are working with your radiator. You're trying to connect your radiator to your main loop, and that's primarily because once you have already fitted your radiator and you have the fans installed towards the bottom side of the radiator, it's very difficult to get hold of those ports which are there on the radiator. So you need some kind of extension for those radiators, and these are basically some of the sizes that I've been using all these time along. This is a 10mm extender. This is a 30mm and this is a 40mm. So these are the various sizes. Again, I cannot actually tell you guys what size to go and do, or what size of extender would you want to go and buy. That would completely depend upon the kind of loop that you have. So I'm gonna come that to in a moment once I finish talking to you guys about the various fittings. The next thing that you definitely want to have in your loop is basically something like this. This is a tap, or this is basically an exhaust valve. And whenever you are going and maintaining your loop, you'll have to take water out of your system, and this thing definitely comes handy. So the way this thing works is basically it's something like a tap. Just turn it, it opens the valve inside and the water can flow. So basically these are the kind of exit valves, extenders, 90° compression fittings, normal compression fittings, male to female compression fittings, extenders. These are some of the basic fittings that you would be requiring when you go and build yourself a custom liquid cool loop. However, there's something that you want to remember here, that even though all the other fittings would be the same, it's just the compression fitting would be different if you have a soft line tubing. Now these are the fittings that are meant for hard line tubing that I just showed you. These are the ones which fit to hard line tubing, not to soft line tubings. Soft line tubings have different kind of compression fittings, so you can go and check that out. You can actually connect that compression fitting to your extender here. That is absolutely fine, but it's mainly the compression fitting which is going to be different depending upon the kind of tubes that you select. Maybe a hardline tube or a softline tube, they have different compression fittings. So just make sure, or you just reconfirm with your seller whether or not the compression fitting that you are buying for your custom liquid cool loop is compatible with the pipe that you are buying. So guys, before I end this video, just want to tell you guys that I'll be starting a Q&A session very shortly, probably next week. So if you guys have any questions, post your questions to me at i2techindia.2020@gmail.com. My email will be there in the description below, so go ahead and post your questions, and I'll reply to all of them next week. So guys, I hope you enjoyed the video. If you enjoyed the video, press that like button and share with your friends. If you have not already subscribed to our channel, go ahead and subscribe to our channel. Press that bell icon so that you can get notified about our future videos. So guys, with this, it's time to say goodbye. Sajeev signing off. Until next time, stay happy, stay healthy, stay blessed. Bye-bye.